On valmis. Yes. Ootas.
All right, welcome everyone to the third day of Eurooppa-forum Turku and this new European Bauhaus talk on beautiful, sustainable and inclusive suburban neighborhoods. My name is Mia Paananen. I work for Turku Southwest Finland European office and I have the honor to moderate this great panel. So today we have here Alessandro Rancati from the European Commission's Joint Research Centre. Then we have architect and director of urban planning of the city of Turku, Timo Hintsanen, and postdoctoral researcher from the University of Turku, Jenni Kuoppa, and last but not least, planning advisor of the city of Oslo, Peter Austin, who is also the chair of the Eurocities Networks Metropolitan Areas Working Group. So welcome everyone online and in the place. So here, this is the third day of Eurooppa-forum Turku, and during the past 2 days we have had discussions on global and European big challenges and topics such as climate change, economic and environmental resilience, and the recovery after this corona pandemic. So we wanted to organize a session that links these topics also to our immediate living surroundings and our neighborhoods. And this is also what the European Commission wanted to do when it launched this new European Bauhaus initiative last year. So the questions are how to connect the green transition to our living surroundings and how to combine culture and art and different disciplines to design more sustainable and attractive, healthy, good living surroundings. So we have also a question here for the audience that you can answer during this session. So you can go to the virtual platform, and there is a word cloud function, and there is a question: what is important for you in your neighborhood, in your living surroundings? So you can answer that question, and then we will look at the answers after the sessions. But let's go directly to the topic. And first, I would like to ask Timo, why do you want to work with New European Bauhaus in Turku? And how do you see the linkage between the initiative and the suburban areas development?
If you allow, I describe how I understand the New European Bauhaus. The original Bauhaus was 100 years ago born in a situation when the world is dramatically changing. It was the age of industrialism and new ways of mobility occurred to the life of the people, and the life changed. And the Bauhaus was eager to make a fundamental change, how the world looks, how the modern world works, how the products are produced and how they look like, and how people live. It was arts, culture, but also technology, building, architecture, and all this. Now we are in the situation, we are facing the climate change, and we are in a moment of another fundamental change. And the new European Bauhaus, in my mind, is trying to find a new answer. What is a new world, which is resource-wise and uses all the resources in a very sustainable way. And it is also a lot of to do with the development of the urban areas. And we have noticed that our suburban areas, where 2/3 of the people in the city of Turku live, they are all built during the 50s, 60s or 70s, and they are at the same time in the need of very profound upgrading. And how to make that sustainable way, we can find answers in new European Bauhaus thinking. And the initiative is very well at the moment. I have noticed, for example, that in European Union's architectural prize, so-called Mies van der Rohe prize, has been awarded 2 last times to renovation projects. Our time is not primarily to build new, but our time is to renovate old, and that's the profound idea of new European Bauhaus as I see it.
Indeed. And how do you then you already described what is the importance here for the suburban neighborhoods, because, for example, in Turku, this is a large of the city area and of the building stock as well. In last May, Turku, you organized a session to launch this kind of development of suburban vision or suburban program, and at the same time to give input to the New European Bauhaus co-creation ideas. So can you tell something about this session or the webinar that we had, key takeaways from there?
Yeah, it was a very successful discussion, and I think that the main remark was that we really need a vision for a long-term vision how to develop the suburban areas. The right way is not to just start projects, renovation projects or upgrading projects and follow what happens. We need a vision. Vision is not a plan or design. It just shows the path to the future for 50 years from now. And it is interesting to discuss with people what they want to, how they want to develop their own neighborhood in that respect, and in fact in that aspect. And what is interesting that there is also very diverse group of people involved. And it's important to get young people, old people, all social groups. They are all eager to make new improvements in their home area. And what is important also is that we notice that small things can make a big change. For example, urban gardening is typical today's feature that makes people more rooted in their own neighborhood and make great things. So, but what is important, of course, is the renovation of the buildings and the public spaces. But we must also remember that there are very good assets on those areas. The apartments in themselves are very high standard at the moment still, although they are built 50 years ago. The proximity of nature is important for people, and the public transport works very well in the neighborhoods. So there are things that are very well organized, but maybe the activity services and maybe the aesthetics as well, which is one of the key points in New European Bauhaus, is something to develop.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear about the challenges that we will discuss maybe later as well, but how do you see then the next steps of developing this suburban program ambition or this New European Bauhaus principles in Turku? How does the city work with the different stakeholders?
We have already made, before New European Bauhaus was launched, City Council made a decision that we make a vision together with the people, and that's very important. That the inclusive idea of doing things is the main principle, and we are working with them. Unfortunately, it's not very easy at the moment when we are under restrictions because of COVID, but in the future we are going to meet people and making things together.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge now, how to engage with the different stakeholders and bring people together. But maybe I would move now to Jenny. So you have done research, conducted research on development of suburban areas, and for instance, mobility and enhancing walkability in cities. And now you're also in a research project studying residents' rights to suburban spaces. How do you see the future of suburban areas? And maybe do you have some recommendations or ideas for regeneration of suburban neighborhoods?
Yes, thank you, Mia, and thank you for having me. Yes, I have done research on urban dwellers' everyday experiences of different kind of urban places and in Finland, and when trying to figure out how to somehow distill those research experiences and residents' different needs into some short recommendations for regeneration, I decided to turn to this very important single concept of walkability. So walking is of course important as such in cities, so for the reasons of healthy environment and for sustainability and climate change. But I think that the concept is useful also because it quite nicely captures and summarizes the qualities of human-friendly environment. So walkability means short distances from home to daily errands. It means that all kinds of people are or can feel safe and welcome when moving around at different times of the day in their close surroundings. And it is also about enjoyment in environment and good quality public spaces and social encounters and so on. So these quality aspects. Perhaps, So, like this quote says, when seeing an empty, quiet neighborhood where pedestrians are absent, it can be read as a sign that some of these important qualities are missing. And so this concept, I think it is also helpful in testing the human aspect of urban design and planning. So walkability is already very well actually understood and also emphasized in urban planning and design of city centers. Also in Turku, I would say very well. But I think that there is still a great potential to develop walkability in suburban areas. And that is not that well understood, I think. So, for example, in our context in Finnish suburbs, walking is pretty much understood as recreation in green surroundings. And this is a very important viewpoint, of course. But I think we should pay more attention to access to services also and access to public spaces where people can meet and socialize. So this, I think the important quality is also that this walking, it creates sense of belonging to one's environment. And so this would be my recommendation to closely study the possibilities of walking and walkability in suburban areas.
That's definitely also my favorite way of going around in the city.
Yeah.
But indeed, when you think about the suburban neighborhoods, you can imagine these parking lots between buildings, and maybe it's more difficult, of course, the distances. But how to develop these spaces, very interesting. Then how do you, when you conduct this research, how do you see working with or co-creating with the citizens, co-creating these, for example, possibilities of walkability?
First of all, I agree with what Timo said, that I think it is increasingly important to think about the ways how to engage with a diverse group of citizens, and especially those people who don't feel convenient or meaningful to take part in formal urban planning participation processes, and or for example activities of traditional residents associations. That might be a growing number of people actually, and I think that maybe we need more resources for planners to go to the field, to where the people are, and develop those. For example, I know that in Turku there are some initiatives that planners or city officials have gone walking with people to their neighborhood and asking them how they feel about their neighborhood, and I think that's a great way to do it.
Yes, indeed, and I know that in Turku there is also this initiative of invite mayor to your neighborhood, and then the residents can talk with the mayor about the issues that they feel important is in their neighborhood. But okay, let's move to our online guests here. So Peter from Oslo. We have the connection. So Peter, we have talked about the co-creation and how to work with the residents, for example. But that's one way to see inclusiveness. But how do you see the different challenges of inclusiveness in suburban neighborhoods?
Thanks. It's a very. I have an echo here. Is that all right? Yeah. Okay. It's a very interesting and important question. I think the idea of co-creation and the focus on design and densification is what planners have been talking about for a long time. It's closely linked to the goal of reducing carbon emissions and accessibility to services and so on. The challenge, the wider challenge for inclusion, I think, is also closely linked to affordable housing. Affordable housing is, by many people now, seen as a global crisis. It maybe doesn't have the same proportions for humanity as the climate crisis. Of course, it doesn't. But the number of people who are now being excluded from taking part in activities in cities, enjoying the way of life that we expect to be part of the inclusive and sustainable future that we want, is a big challenge now with the prices of housing, especially in the larger cities, as high as it is. There are different ways of dealing with this. I'm aware that the European Union is taking steps towards addressing this. It's not a normal, housing is not within the European Union's capacity or competency, but this is a very important area to be looked at. And I think there's a lot to be gained from exchanging and learning between cities and between urban areas on this question. There are city-specific and nationally specific answers to this. I know, for example, Helsinki has one of Europe's perhaps most advanced systems of providing affordable housing through quite complex rental systems and ownership patterns. A number of cities, including Oslo, are facing quite big challenges on this at the moment. So I think that this is something we need to address, as well as it's linked to design, but it's not only about design. So I hope that the affordable housing question can be lifted onto the agenda for the European Bauhaus.
Yes, thank you. So it is a large initiative, or these ideas or challenges of inclusiveness, and one aspect is definitely this affordability. In Oslo, you have worked on, for example, European-funded projects, for example, Urbact project, to create strategies to develop these fringe areas of cities. But also you have your local future built program, which can be seen kind of this local new European Bauhaus model. So can you share some ideas or lessons learned from Oslo, how to first of all develop the fringe areas of cities, and how to work with the new European Bauhaus model on the local level?
Okay, thank you. Very briefly, the Urbact experience was very valuable. We had this was a project called Suburban within the previous framework in the Urbact program. It was led by Antwerp. We had partners from Baimari, Romania, Barcelona region, Brno, Kasoria, Düsseldorf, Solina, and Vienna. It was a very valuable project with cities at a number of scales. There were quite a lot of messages that came out of this. There's no one size fits all, of course. Every city has its own specific challenges and needs. But these fringe areas, they're often vast. They cover huge areas. They have a lot of potential. They also have usually have a very complex twist of their own historical, economic, and social histories, which often don't go back much further than a couple of generations. So this is actually a very interesting area to work. There's no tabula rasa. We're starting from areas which already have a lot of green space, very often not very accessible, not well developed in a current context, but at the same time, often quite accessible to the central parts of the city and the services that are there. We found that it's very important to embrace existing qualities, look at what you have, and really try and pull out the good points. They may be hidden. There are some areas in these urban fringes which are much poorer quality, and it's important to work in a directed way to improve those areas. The collective layer is important. We're talking about public space, joining the dots in public transport, cycle routes, and so on. So there is a real collective space, of course, also linked to the public services if there are gaps in that. Working on different levels is important, involving the city and the regional authorities, and of course the state bodies if they're involved with transport or utilities or whatever. The complexity of all this means that you often have to plan and implement and organize at the same time. There's projects at different scales. It's not just one plan and then you roll it out in a systematic way. You have to have a kind of flexible approach, a sort of float zone, which is continually moving forward and involving people at different levels. So it's often quite difficult to tie this down on a paper with clear boxes and arrows. But this really was the direction we felt was necessary. And through this, it's a lot easier to be open for involvement from local stakeholders, whether they're businesses, landowners, and of course the different groups of the population, as was described by the leader from Turku, which is the essential part of it. So there is a genuine sense of local ownership. In our own experience in Oslo, through the Urbact project, we had some pilot schemes which directly involved local businesses and developers in totally new ways. They were able to look at their own land schemes, their own projects, their own visions, together with a range of public officials and come up with totally new ideas, thinking outside the box. Very briefly, our future built scheme, which we have in Oslo. This is our local European Bauhaus, which we've been doing since 2008. It's very successful in my view. It's now in the second 10-year period. So regional collaboration between Oslo and 5 neighbours. We have central government support, with small secretariat with skills in design, planning. Media is very important, and also organisation. Similarly to the European Bauhaus, it awards kind of prizes for good projects. And it's also got a rolling programme of seminars, now of course webinars, and sharing information and experience. It's been successful in involving local developers and architects and professionals. It doesn't have a strong public domain. I would emphasize they're really working on the stakeholders in the built environment. It's linked loosely to the city council, but they have quite a high degree of freedom to work on their own within their budget and their mandate. Their mandate is actually identical with the New European Bauhaus. It's lovely. I mean, when I saw the New European Bauhaus, they said, well, it's about sustainability and it's about inclusiveness. and it's about design. And I said, well, that's what we're doing already. So it's just a copy paste. But of course, doing it at the local level has its own challenges and limitations. So we don't have the same international perspective initially. But I think the European Bauhaus gives us new opportunities to do that. And we're moving towards a position where our local network can engage more directly with what's happening across the European scale. Maybe at some later dates, we're looking at the possibility of hosting an event in Oslo or through Oslo in the same way that Turku is now doing. So we can try and focus on how to do this thing at the local level, because it's a very innovative process. It's very engaging. So we look forward to that, and I hope that we'll be able to share some ideas as this rolls along in different contexts. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I think it's in this session, we don't have the time to delve into all these answers or challenges, of course, but this is to show that how important it is to exchange between cities and on the European level as well. And the challenge is, of course, how to connect the local actors, regional actors, national actors, but then the different European cities as well. And this is, or not only cities, but different actors. So this is what the European Bauhaus, of course, gives tools to do as well. But that's why I would like to hear from the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, Alessandro, who has been working and designing this process. So it's an interesting initiative in that sense that it was launched before actually even the Commission knew what it will be about in detail. So during the last spring, it has been this kind of co-design phase where the Commission asks different stakeholders to come up with ideas, share ideas, what the new European Bauhaus could be, what is sustainability, inclusiveness, and this attractiveness of living surroundings. So could you, Alessandro, shortly tell us what has been done during last spring and what ideas have come out of it? And how do you see that the suburban development that we have discussed here links to the European Bauhaus in your view?
Yes, perfect. Thanks, Mia. I wanted to make a remark on this first phase. Exactly like you said, it was a phase where we had the initiative, but we wanted to, in a certain sense, look at what was happening already, and that was coherent with the principles of the initiative. So the idea was, on one side, to look for ideas, but maybe even most importantly, to look for examples. So like Peter said, there's a lot already happening that is very aligned to the new European Bauhaus, and so what it's important is maybe more to connect this existing reality than to reinvent or to reimagine, etc. So this was a bit the idea that was the thread of the collection, and then we went online, and mostly because of the limitation of the pandemic, and we used these two major entry points. One was the collection of stories, so concrete experiences, and the other one was more a collection of papers, writings, and ideas, etc. So more expression of position of different stakeholders. We've received a lot, and the good news is that everything is already online. So if you search for the European Bauhaus, let's say main page, and you go in co-design section, there is a part where you can access essentially all the papers that were submitted, and all the different ideas, examples, and also challenges. And we're working a little bit on improving the interface to access all the different contributions, but at the moment you see that you have some ways to filter them, etc. So if you're interested in different parts, and in this case if you're interested in suburban areas, you can probably find not just examples, but also the persons behind the examples, or the person who reported the examples, so create a connection and get in touch, which is in my view what it's really fundamental, which is this idea of connecting people that are working and active on similar topics. Getting more into the topic, but I'm going to be super quick because there's a lot. The key connection with the let's say suburban areas are with obviously the concept of urban landscapes. So it happens a lot. There's a lot of thinking about considering these parts of the urban dimension as part of a landscape. There is a lot of connection, like we've heard already, with redesigning in a collaborative way, so that let's say the spirit of beauty or the idea of beautiful experience is a result of a collaborative process where different stakeholders, different kind of people can express what they think is valuable for them, and so that's a way to create a shared beauty, no? or shared beautiful experiences. There is obviously a connection with urban areas. Sorry, with rural areas. So the idea that, for example, recuperating the centers of rural areas may be one of the ideas that could be reused for revitalizing the more marginal part of a city, so creating polycentricity. And so how rural areas are working on reinventing, re-energizing the centers could be an inspiration or a form of you know, an inspiration for let's say the marginal part of a city. And just as a very quick reaction on this topic of affordable housing, there is actually well, there's many members, but Housing Europe is one of the partners of the European Bauhaus, and they are totally centered on the topic of affordable housing. There's also a collaboration between the Affordable Housing Initiative at the European Commission, which is launched by DG Grow, and the European Bauhaus. So the dimension of affordability is of course central of the idea of inclusiveness, and so it is part of the discourse on the European Bauhaus. And with this, I would say that yeah, maybe I would stop, and maybe if there are any questions or if there is a little space for conversation, I'm at disposition.
Thank you, Alessandro. And maybe then I could ask our panelists first, that do you have any questions or comments to to Alessandro, what has been said, or to each other, perhaps?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for your nice speeches. I'm not sure if you understood similarly the idea of suburban areas in Turku. Our suburban areas are mostly high-rise residential areas. They are not low-rise. In that way, they are not rural, I think. But of course, the connection with the rural areas is very important. So it was very interesting to hear your ideas and fine remarks, Alessandra.
Yes, and perhaps there can be lessons learned from developing the centers of rural areas and then the suburban areas. Peter?
Yes, I'd just like to pick up on this the rural theme. Perhaps it sounds strange from a network of cities. I'm aware that the European Commission is currently working on developing a much wider rural agenda. This is linked to the spatial discussions that have been going on for a long time. And it kind of matches the urban agenda, which was part of the previous period and is being revised now. I think the urban-rural linkages are often missing in these discussions. We need to keep that focus quite strong. The idea of polycentricity is very important, but it's linked very much to the flows between these centres, whether they're rural centres, suburban centres, or the city centres. This is quite a difficult theme to address at the moment because our mobility is still fairly restricted as a result of the pandemic. But of course, we have flows of goods and services, even though we're not perhaps all commuting to work anymore, at least to our offices. But I think the dynamics of the spatial dynamics are important. They're not just the spatial structure, but the spatial dynamics, the movement, the linkages. So I think if we could introduce the urban-rural perspective in these discussions, this is, I think, would be an important important thing for the European Bauhaus to actually move forward on, because they don't have a strong share in either the urban or the rural side. I mean, they could actually be part of building the bridge, which needs to be done. We know that these two themes are often very isolated from each other. They're led by separate leaders. They don't have the same policy frameworks. But the European Bauhaus actually has a potential to provide an innovative way of joining the dots here. So I would like to see that. And this would also be very much part of the suburban discussions, as the leader from Turku just mentioned. I mean, we're talking about leisure, access to leisure spaces in the rural areas at the same time as the commuting flows in from the neighboring villages. There's a whole lot of things that do link these spaces, and we all know that there's migration in and out of cities. At the moment, there's more migration out of cities because of perhaps slightly driven by the pandemic. So there's a lot of interesting things within this. And this is also part of the inclusion discussion and inclusiveness discussion, in my view. Thanks.
No, thank you. And perhaps I could still ask Alessandro, so because we have here people following who are interested, of course, in suburban development and city development, how do you see how will now in the delivery phase European Commission support cities, for example, working together on these kind of projects, of course, by providing this platform to share examples, but any other ways?
Yes. Maybe without entering into the details, which I don't even know, but there is obviously a communication coming up on the 15th of September, so that's a policy document. As part of the policy document, there is also what we have called, in a certain sense, the ecosystem or the policy ecosystem around the European Bauhaus. And in that document, you have all the different initiatives and tools and instruments that support the different parts of the European Bauhaus. And so I think that simply by accessing that kind of document and looking at the key principles of the European Bauhaus, you can support several different topics that may be helping the development of peripheral areas, etc. So it really also depends on where the focus is, or what we want to look for when we are developing suburban areas, because there are some measures to support, for example, co-designing the places, or there is a special attention on that. There are measures to support the renovation of buildings, or to support the use of certain processes, or even the introduction of arts and creative forms of interaction. And so it really depends on the focus that you want to give.
Thank you. So there are very many different possibilities, and also, of course, this funding period has started this year, and there are lots of also funding available from different programs, I think, that link to this. But now we don't have much time left, so I would like to ask if from our audience there is questions either here in Turku location or then online, and then also we can check the answers to our question to the audience. don't know if I can see here from the chat, but I can at least comment, because now I think we should be able to see some answers to our question, what is important for you in your neighborhood. So there is services and safety, nice neighborhood, nice neighbors. So yeah, this people aspect, green spaces and green areas and nature. So clearly, yes, of course, this green aspect, that it is present in neighborhoods as well, and safety and public transport. So yes, different kind of things. Maybe we do a very quick round. I would like to ask you, Timo and Jenny, can you say very quickly, like, what is important for you in your neighborhood or living surrounding?
I would like to refer to Jenny's presentation, and I think that the important thing for me is that I don't have to spend a lot of time moving from place to another and back, and a walkable neighborhood gives possibility for that.
Yeah, indeed.
Time is also important. You didn't mention that, but it's also in walkable city. You don't have time. You don't need to spend time so much moving from place to another.
What about Jenny?
Yes, I definitely agree with that. And for me, it's important to, yes, also green surroundings is very important for me, but also that I live in a suburb in Helsinki, and for me it's important to have at least one nice cafe and some restaurants nearby. So yes, some of those urban elements and green environment, combination of that.
Also services.
Yeah.
And yes, what about Peter? Personally.
What would I value in a suburban space? Well, I think the access to cultural arenas is very important. Suburban areas, I mean, they are big. They're multicultural. There's often a range of different people and activities, and I think this is the nice thing about it. They have a city feel at the same time as they are not so congested or precious as the city centre. So it's often a bit sort of low key, which is quite nice.
So it's actually,
I think the time question is very important. We've learned from the pandemic, at least those of us who've been privileged to have home working options, the time saved from journeys to work every day is actually a huge asset. I mean, I don't think that the social economic value of that has been calculated from what I've seen, but it must be massive. And in terms of personal assets, I think for a lot of people this is something we will be taking with us into the post-COVID era, and maybe this is something that is very important for suburban areas to engage with as well. If more people are traveling less, then this would also mean that the market for local services, local centres within the suburbs should improve. The demand for local cafes and small shops and areas to be with neighbours together. This is something we could probably take with us into the future.
Yeah, definitely. Very shortly, Alessandro. We can't hear you now.
Yeah, typical.
Yes.
For me, I think it's the idea of having an identity. So when I go into a place, I would like to feel that it has some form of spirit that I can feel, and so getting into a place, I think that's what would make me stay into a particular area, and that's what I'm looking for more.
Yes, that's one thing that you can think also in the suburban development, that every suburb has its characteristic, and the residents can be proud that I'm not only, for example, living in Turku or in Oslo or Helsinki, but I live in this neighborhood, and this has its own characteristics. But now we are running out of time, so I think I want to warmly thank you for this discussion and for the audience. And I think this was, of course, only a small scratch of the topic and how we can better develop suburban areas. But we will continue this discussion and exchange between cities, between different actors, with the European level, with the Commission. And we are looking forward to, of course, to the communication in September from the Commission about the new European Bauhaus and for the development of the suburban vision or program in Turku. So many thanks, and enjoy the last programs of the Eurooppa-forum here in Turku. And I wish you also a nice weekend, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Turku, for organizing.
Thank you.
This is a very good event. Thank you.